6 years. That's how long it's been since I last spoke to my sister. 6 years since she betrayed me. And now, without my consent, my parents have invited her to my bridal shower, hoping to force a reconciliation. I'm 28, she's 26, and our relationship has been broken for as long as I can remember. Our parents never discouraged the fierce competition between us. In fact, they fueled it. Maybe they thought it was harmless, a way to push us to do better. But all it did was breed resentment. As kids, we could occasionally put our differences aside, but as we got older, the animosity deepened. By the time we were in high school, we barely spoke, and we preferred it that way. When I left for college, I only saw her when I came home, brief encounters that were much easier than constantly being around someone who made life unbearable. My world was opening up. I had a promising future, a career on the horizon, and a loving boyfriend, whom I met during my last year of college. After 3 years of friendship, he finally gathered the courage to ask me out, and since I already thought the world of him, I didn't hesitate to say yes. After graduation, I moved in with him, and a few months into our relationship, I decided to bring him home to meet my parents. It was meant to be a casual family dinner, nothing more. But fate had other plans. Unbeknownst to me, my sister had decided to visit that same weekend. Given our history, I should have expected disaster. At the time, my life was flourishing. I had a stable job, a place of my own, and a loving partner. My sister, on the other hand, wasn't doing as well. She had been forced to settle for her second-choice college, and, according to my parents, was struggling to make friends, which was why she kept coming home so often. The moment I introduced my boyfriend to my family, I saw the irritation on her face, the subtle shift in her expression. But then, something changed. Almost instantly, she turned on the charm, flashing a smile that wasn't meant for me. It started off small, too much interest in his life, leaning into the conversation whenever he spoke. But it quickly escalated. She wasn't just being friendly, she was openly flirting with him. Right in front of me. At first, I tried to ignore it, pretending that it wasn't happening, not wanting my boyfriend to witness the dysfunction in my family. But my patience had limits. By the time we sat down for dinner, she had dropped all pretenses of subtlety. She battered her lashes, giggled at every little thing he said, and at one point, even playfully touched his arm. It was unbearable. I finally lost my composure. "Could you stop?" I snapped, my voice sharp and unyielding. "You're being disgusting." She merely rolled her eyes, undeterred. "Relax," she drawled, throwing me a smug smirk. "I'm just showing him that there are alternatives." I saw red. My hands clenched into fists under the table. "Excuse me?" She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Oh, come on. You know, he deserves better." That was it. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. "You're just jealous. You can't stand the fact that my life turned out better than yours, so now you're trying to ruin it. You're a loser, and you always have been." Her face twisted in fury. I barely had time to register the movement before she lunged across the table, yanking my hair so hard that I gasped. Chaos erupted. My parents shouted, my boyfriend sprang into action, but neither of us backed down. Years of pent-up resentment exploded into a full-blown fight, grabbing, scratching, shoving. It wasn't just about that night, it was about everything. It was my boyfriend who finally managed to pull me away, dragging me toward the door as I screamed at her, my chest heaving with rage. "Stay the hell away from me." That was the last time I spoke to her. The next day, my parents called, trying to smooth things over, claiming they had reprimanded her. But she refused to apologize. And I didn't want one. I told them in no uncertain terms that I was done. With her. With whatever twisted version of family they thought we had. It's been 6 years since that night. I've moved on, built a life without her in it. We see each other at family gatherings, but we don't interact. It's better that way. Everyone knows we don't get along, but no one really knows why. I had planned to keep it that way. Until my bridal shower. My parents, for reasons beyond my understanding, decided to invite her without telling me. When she walked in, time seemed to freeze. The laughter and conversation in the room died instantly, replaced by an unbearable silence. I wasn't the only one shocked. My sister's face mirrored my own. Then, my parents spoke. "It's been 6 years. Things have changed. You're older now. More mature. Isn't it time to move on?" I could see it in her eyes. She had been tricked into coming here. I turned to my parents, my voice low and firm. "You had no right to do this. Not today. Not ever. I wasn't about to let them ruin this for me." "Leave," I told them, gesturing toward the door. But they didn't. Instead, they insisted, pushed. Let it go, they urged. It's in the past. The past? I took a deep breath, then did something I hadn't done in 6 years. I told the truth. Right then and there, in front of everyone, I laid it all out: the rivalry, the jealousy, the fight, everything. I turned to the room and asked, would any of you just move on if the person who attacked you never even bothered to apologize? The weight of my words hung in the air. My sister, for once, had nothing to say. And then, without another word, she turned and left. The silence in the room lingered long after my sister left. My mother, clearly startled, followed her out in a hurry, while my father remained, his face a storm of frustration. You're being ridiculous, he snapped. This happened 6 years ago. You're acting like a child. A child? I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. I don't care how much time has passed, I said coldly. I don't want her in my life, and you had no right to bring her here. He scoffed, shaking his head. You're ruining your own wedding with this grudge. I exhaled sharply, my patience running thin. Leave. For a moment, I thought he'd argue, but instead he let out a frustrated sigh and stormed off. As soon as the door closed behind him, my legs nearly gave out. My fiancé was by my side instantly, his hand steady on my back. You okay? He asked gently. I nodded, though my mind was still racing. I had spent 6 years burying that night, hiding the truth from most of my family, keeping the peace. But my parents had forced my hand. Now everyone knew. Despite the chaos, my bridesmaids and guests quickly jumped in to keep the energy light. Within minutes, we were back to celebrating, pretending as if nothing had happened. I let myself sink into the distraction, laughing, smiling, enjoying the moment. But a storm was brewing. I just didn't know it yet. The next morning, my phone rang. When I saw my mother's name on the screen, I hesitated before answering. I barely had time to say hello before she launched into a frantic demand. You need to call your aunt. I blinked, confused. What? Why? Your sister lost her job offer because of you, she hissed. Fix it. I frowned, my brain scrambling to catch up. What are you talking about? She let out a sharp breath, clearly irritated. Your sister has been out of work for 6 months. She had to move back home because she couldn't afford her rent. She finally had a chance. Your aunt was going to hire her for a marketing position in her new business. I still didn't understand what this had to do with me, okay? She revoked the offer after hearing what you said at your bridal shower. My stomach twisted. Apparently, my aunt had changed her mind after I revealed the truth about my sister's actions that night 6 years ago. In her words, she couldn't trust someone with such an obvious lack of self-control to manage an entire department. And beyond that, she had already interviewed a more qualified candidate. I hadn't sabotaged my sister's job. My aunt had simply chosen the better option. But my mother wasn't interested in logic. You need to fix this, she demanded. I almost laughed. Fix what? She lost the job because she wasn't the best candidate. No, she lost the job because you humiliated her in front of the family. My mother snapped. You didn't need to bring up the past. But you did. You made her look like some unhinged, unstable child, and now everyone thinks she's a mess. She is a mess, I said bluntly. The moment the words left my mouth, my mother's voice sharpened. You always do this. You always have to make sure you're the golden child, don't you? I clenched my jaw. She physically attacked me. And she never apologized. Oh, please. She let out a humorless laugh. You provoked her first. You called her a loser. I inhaled slowly, steadying my voice. I said words. She used violence. Do you see the difference? Silence. I shook my head. You're not angry because she lost the job. You're angry because you can't control me. You thought you could force us to make up, but it backfired. And now you're blaming me instead of accepting that she is responsible for her own consequences. Another long silence. Then, my mother's voice turned sharp. You really are heartless. I didn't flinch. And you really are blind. Then, I hung up. And I blocked her number. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of relief. I wasn't questioning myself. I wasn't wondering if I had done something wrong. I had simply chosen myself. And for once, I wasn't sorry. Blocking my parents should have been the end of it. But they weren't done with me yet. A few days later, they showed up at my doorstep. I had just come home from work, exhausted, barely holding it together with the last-minute wedding preparations. My fiancé and I had a dress fitting to get to, and the last thing I needed was them. When I saw them standing outside, I groaned. They're not leaving, are they? My fiancé muttered beside me. Not unless we call the cops, I sighed. And honestly, I don't want to be that person. We stood by the door, debating whether to just walk past them and pretend we had somewhere urgent to be. But we both knew that wasn't going to work. My parents weren't the kind to take hints. They'd just keep showing up until I gave them an audience. I inhaled deeply and turned to my fiancé. 5 minutes. He nodded, and we let them in. I barely had the door closed before my mother launched into it. You need to talk to your aunt. Your sister still doesn't have a job because of you. I exhaled slowly, my patience already threadbare. We've been over this. I'm not going to manipulate my aunt into hiring someone less qualified. My father crossed his arms. You destroyed your sister's reputation. The least you can do is fix it. I told the truth, I countered. That's not my fault. My mother's jaw clenched. You are so... Enough, a voice cut in. I froze. For the first time in 6 years, my sister spoke to me. She had been silent until now, standing slightly behind them, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. But now, she stepped forward, her eyes locked onto mine. They're not here for the job, she said, her voice steady. They're here for me. I frowned, thrown off guard. What? She took a breath, and for the first time she looked different. Not smug. Not bitter. Just tired. I wanted to talk to you. My parents exchanged confused glances. Clearly, they hadn't planned for this. I narrowed my eyes. Why? She hesitated, then exhaled sharply, as if she'd been holding it in for too long. Because I owe you an apology. I wasn't sure I'd heard her right. She took another step forward. For 6 years, I've avoided saying this. I made excuses. I convinced myself that you overreacted, that it wasn't that bad. But it was. Her voice grew softer. I treated you horribly. I tried to humiliate you in front of your boyfriend. And when that wasn't enough, I attacked you. I could hear the sincerity in her voice, but still, I remained cautious. Why now? She hesitated, then sighed. Because I've had a lot of time to think. And because I've been miserable for a long time, and I finally understand why. She swallowed hard, glancing away before meeting my gaze again. I was jealous of you. My whole life, I felt like I had to compete with you, because that's what Mom and Dad wanted. You were always the one who had it together. You were the golden child. And I hated that. I hated feeling like I was always one step behind. So instead of being your sister, I became your enemy. I felt something crack inside me. I had spent years resenting her. Years thinking she never cared, that she never even thought about what she had done. And yet, here she was, laying it all bare. I wish I had been a better sister, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I see now that we could have been friends. And I threw that away. I blinked rapidly, trying to process everything. My chest felt tight. My hands trembled at my sides. I had spent so many years waiting for this moment. And now that it was here, I didn't know what to do with it. I don't expect you to forgive me, she added quickly. I just needed to say it. That's all. And with that, she turned to leave. For a moment, I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then, before I could stop myself, I reached for my phone. And I unblocked her. Later that night, my fiancé and I sat in silence, replaying everything that had happened. She meant it, he finally said. I nodded slowly. I know. So, do you forgive her? I exhaled. I don't know. Not yet. He nodded, squeezing my hand. Take your time. And for the first time in 6 years, I actually wanted to. Forgiving my sister wasn't instant. It wasn't a grand, dramatic moment where everything suddenly felt okay. It was slow, hesitant, but real. A few days after our conversation, I sent her a message. Hey, I just wanted to say I appreciate what you said the other day. It meant a lot. Her, I meant every word. And I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm really sorry. I know. And I think I'd like you to come to my wedding. The moment I sent it, my heart pounded. I had spent years convinced I'd never let her back in. But now, after hearing her own pain, her regret, I realized something. I didn't want to keep carrying this weight. Her response came quickly. Are you sure? I don't want to make things weird for you. I'm sure. Then I'd love to be there. For the first time in years, I smiled at the sight of my sister's name on my screen. The wedding was beautiful. Every detail was perfect, every moment filled with love. My sister was there, standing among my friends and family, no longer a ghost lurking in the background of my life. My parents, on the other hand, were not. They had sent an email a few days prior. Subject: a mistake has been made. Message: we won't be attending the wedding. It's clear that you and your sister have decided to demonize us, to blame us for everything that went wrong. We tried to be good parents, but you've made it clear that you don't value us. So we're stepping back. Maybe someday you'll see things differently. But for now, we'll live our lives without worrying about our ungrateful daughters. I read it once, then again, and then I deleted it. I thought I would feel something: anger, sadness, regret. But all I felt was nothing. And that, in itself, was freeing. As my new husband and I packed for our honeymoon, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led me here.
6 years ago, I lost a sister.
But today, I was getting her back. Maybe we wouldn't be best friends overnight. Maybe we'd still have wounds to heal. But for the first time in years, I wanted to try. And that was enough. Because life, as I was finally learning, was too short to carry old wounds forever.